This is House Planning Help, episode 195. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and try to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Gordon Lewis, and we're going to be talking about cellulose insulation, or recycled newspaper, how it works and whether it's a good idea, eco-credentials and so on. First though, a new addition to the YouTube channel. This one should have been on there some time ago, but life has got in the way this year, what with trying to design a house and getting that all ready to go for the construction phase, and then having a new addition to the family. Things have just been slower than they perhaps would on a typical year. Anyway, the idea was that when we left our old property, that there were two things that I thought I was really going to miss about that. One was the fact that we used all of the space every day, so I made a video on that, which I can point you to in the show notes. And then there's this second one, which we've finally uploaded, which is all about location, because our location was second to none. And of course, you can't always plan where you want to be for a self-build. You can try. And that's what this one's about, showing how if you've got a cracking location, sometimes it can even mean, in our case, we were down a car. So we only had one car for the whole family and everything that we needed to do. So check that out. We'll embed it at the bottom of the show notes today. Let's get to our featured interview with Gordon Lewis. I'm making this episode for a couple of reasons. If you checked out our Lloyd Alter interview, Lloyd Alter works at Tree Hugger and does various writing for publications like The Guardian and Mother Nature Network. But he was expressing doubts about buildings that use cellulose insulation. And because this is the insulation type that they've been using at Buckinghamshire Passive House, I've had a chance to see it firsthand, how it works, and also meet an expert. Gordon has decades of experience, and I thought he's the perfect person to catch up with. So I started by asking him to tell me a little bit about his professional background and what he's been doing all these years.
I've been involved with cellulose insulation now for well over 26 years. Started with XL Industries back in 1991, and that closed in 2014 and then became self-employed. So I took the trade of going self-employed from all the years that I'd gained with XL, and sort of doing all the insulation and the installation of warm cell into timber frame properties.
When we talk about cellulose, what is it at a basic level? We're always told recycled newspaper. Is there more to it?
No, not really. It is made from recycled newspaper. All the newspapers that we read, all the tabloids and all the rest of it. To make the product, to give you some idea of it, it needs to be dry paper that comes into the factory. Then it gets milled down to a smaller particle size, and then it goes into what we call an armor mill system or a fiberized system that make the actual fibers of the paper much, much smaller. And at that point, then you have fire retardants that are added to the paper to actually make the cellulose product.
Is this a plentiful supply, or do we imagine it will decline over time?
I think with paper over the years, I have seen it slightly decline, only down to technology, because people are using phones and apps and computers and all the rest of it. So papers are not made as much as they used to be made, but there is a big abundance of paper still out there. When we had the factory at Ebervale and down in Rumney, we were getting a lot of paper coming over from Ireland and other different countries. So obviously they have got a lot of surplus of paper. So there's a lot of paper out there, but it is slowly sort of getting much, much smaller.
And these factories, I'm imagining there aren't a massive amount of them. So how many people make a product like this at the moment?
There are a number of factories. Well, XL was the sole factory in the UK making insulation, but there is a company, a very small company in Ireland. There are a number of companies in France, and then obviously in Europe, you've got Finland and Germany in particular, Sweden, Belgium, where there are many sort of more manufacturers of cellulose, primarily down to the fact they've got the resources to do a lot more recycling and all the rest of it. But I think there's quite a few that have gone by the wayside. One, due to overhead costs, and two, the shortage of paper as well hasn't helped sometimes, which have closed one or two factories. But there's still one or two that are sort of manufacturing, particularly one in the Czech Republic called CIUR, and they actually make the brand of warm cell, and they ship it from Czech Republic to the UK.
Who came up with this idea in the first place? Was it just because of the product that was there to do something with?
From what I can gather, there was some form of cellulose that was being introduced in either the late 20s or the late 30s in the States. But the actual product, I believe, became more as an insulation product. I think it was back in the sort of 70s, early 80s that it became sort of a known product of insulation. That's how far I can remember back to. Is
it only ever used with timber frame? You would only ever put it into that void?
Mostly it's suited and ideal for timber frame buildings, but it can be used in other circumstances. It depends, obviously, where the insulation is going, because it's made from paper. You don't want it to come in contact with any damp surfaces or any surfaces where there's a lot of risk of condensation problems. But primarily, it's designed perfectly for timber frame buildings, whether they be one-off houses, schools, or anything that's made from timber frame that can accept the cellulose insulation.
Are there similar linings on the inside and outside? What would it look like, that cavity?
There are a number of different types of materials from the outside to the inside, where they're using rigid board on the outside, rigid board on the inside. You've got so many different types of makes of different boards that give different thermal performance. And then you've got materials then that can mix and match. Say, for example, you can use a rigid board on the outside, and then you can use a membrane on the inside, or you may use a membrane on the outside, and you may use a board on the inside. It's all down to the actual sandwich of what the insulation's going out to, basically to have no condensation problems.
I know you do lots of these jobs, so I'm hoping you might remember the one where I met you, where they were using the PH15 build. So can you describe the process that you go through from maybe even costing it up? You know, how do you know how much product you're going to be needing to begin with and turning up?
What we need to know, first of all, is one, where the insulation's going. Is it going into walls? Is it going into floors? Is it going into a coal loft, what we call an attic space? Is it going into a warm roof, what we call a sloping ceiling? Internal walls. There are a number of places that we need to know where the insulation is going. Once we establish what the client wants, where the insulation is going, then we need to know then the actual depth of the insulation that's required, say for walls, for example, and we need to know then the square meterage, so we can work out then the actual calculation for the amount of material that's needed. So once we've got all those figures, where it's going, the area to the size of the material that it's going into, and the thickness, and then what we do then, we work out the average density that's required for that particular area, being a wall or a sloping roof, for example, and then with that formula that we use, then we can establish how much material is required for that particular build.
And then you cut holes in the wall, or normally is that prepared waiting for you?
That tends to be done these days when you've got a rigid board on the inside. They're generally 9 times out of 10 they're OSB or OSB-E1. It's a vapor control sort of OSB board. What we need to do then, we go in, and because obviously we can't see where the voids are, but we know through the nailing pattern or the screw pattern or what have you, or look at drawings, for example, and we will core a hole in each void that we need then to gain access to pump the insulation in.
It always seems counterintuitive that, particularly on this property, it's very airtight property, and then you're suddenly coming in and cutting circular holes everywhere.
Yeah. it's a downside to the point where you look and think, oh, you've made all these holes in the walls, but there's no other way of gaining access to get the insulation in. So once we've cored the hole and filled up the void with insulation, then we'll make good then with the hole that we've cut. We'll put the core back in, and then we'll use the special sealing tape then that will seal the core back over the board. That makes it back 100% airtight.
I don't know whether this is something that they even told you, but it was below 0.01 air changes an hour at 50 Pascal, which is pretty impressive. There aren't too many properties like that in the UK.
I was well impressed with the results. Apparently it was one of the best they've recorded. I was more than happy with what I had done in particular to core and hole those holes in that property and making sure that all the holes were sealed up properly.
Yeah, and on that, how many holes do you think you cut? I think it's around about 400 square metre floor area, just to give a visual idea. So how many holes do you reckon?
I think we may have cored probably 500 holes maybe. We may have cored and cut and repaired. So that says something, to cut all those holes and to repair all those holes. And we had to be very, very careful when we did the repairs that the tape was well sealed and there was no creases in the tape. Well chuffed with the results.
Going back to how you do that, can you describe the equipment that you have both in the van, because you normally have someone working with you there, don't you? And then you're at the other end with your pipe, if that's the technical term for it?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, we turn up to site, establish where we're going to start working and whatnot, and where the power is and everything, and have a look inside the property where and what needs doing. We attach the hose to the machine, run the hose into the property, and depends where we're going to start in the house. Generally we start generally downstairs on the walls, for example, particularly when walls are open all the way through from the ground going up to the first floor or even higher. Then we can pump the insulation in on the first floor. The machine side of things, it's a Crandall machine that I use. I've been with I've known Crandall and used Crandall equipment for the last 26 years, but I have used many, many other different types of machine. And they're all designed to break up cellulose product, particularly warm cell that we use. And the machine then breaks up fibre, and then once it's broken up into the machine, goes into an airlock, generally based underneath the machine, and then there's blowers behind the back of the airlock, then that blows the fibre through the hose then to the delivery point to where I'm injecting the fibre in.
And how do you know you've got enough in each cavity and there's not a hole or a space, or does it just happen by magic?
Mostly it's down to experience, but when you are sort of filling sections and you've got the equipment sort of set up right and everything, and you have the certain special tools that we use to inject the fibre in, you just get used to what you're doing. But saying that, you can carry out tests to make sure that the insulation's gone in at the right density and that it is where it's blown to. So you could core extra holes if you want, but once you get used to installing the insulation, you get a feel for it, that you know that you've reached the point of no return, that if stopped pumping and you continue then pumping somewhere else. It's that type of thing, really, to be honest.
You mentioned around about 500 voids in this particular property. So how do you make sure you don't miss one?
A lot of it is case of because you do a lot of timber framed houses, you get to know the makeup and the design of a lot of these frame kits. You get to know the little nooks and crannies, the small gaps you need to, especially above windows and doors. There are particular things to watch out for, and especially in the corners of buildings where sometimes you may be able to gain access on the inside of the building, but if they're butted up together and there's no access, then you have to gain access on the outside of the corners of the property. So with saying that, there's a few things you can do. One, like I said, you can look at the drawings to find out where all these spaces are, but they tend to change now and again when the property's being built. Sometimes you can speak to the guys who put the boards on. They can tell you where these gaps are. You can ask these builders or wherever. They can write on the boards for you sometimes. I've been on jobs where they've actually written on the OSB board to say there's a gap or not a gap. Just put a little cross or something. So that makes life easier. And sometimes if I'm in doubt, I'll drill a small hole to check that if there's a space or not a space. So there's always a way around it that we'll find something that needs to be filled.
Now, I don't know this fact 100%, but when I was chatting to Janet, who was the architect on this project and also one of the founders of the PH15 system, she was saying something like, when you look at the building, 80% of it is insulation. Does that sound about right? Probably,
yeah. I'd say, yeah, about that figure, because when we tend to work out calculations, for example, of the amount of material that's going in, I make a final deduction then, particularly if you have the gross square meterage. You take out anything between 12 and 15% for the timber fraction, as we call it, to take out the doors and windows and the timber that's used, because obviously that then is deducted from the amount of material that's needed. So that 80% figure is probably about right of actual insulation gone in.
I can see that this is a very ecological way of building. I think one concern that maybe a lot of people have is moisture. So let's talk a little bit about that and addressing some of these issues. When you blow in your insulation to begin with, is it always a covered building or not always?
Generally, the rule of thumb is that before any installation is carried out with cellulose, you need the building to be wind and watertight, particularly watertight, because you don't want no water ingress to get into the walls. You don't want the water ingress to get into any part of the building where cellulose is going to go. Too much water and cellulose is not a good thing, particularly if you've got a constant leak or there's rainwater continually getting into the frame of the building. So that's why the building needs to be wind and watertight. As long as it's watertight, that's fine. If the doors and windows are not in, it's not a problem, as long as those access areas, the doors or the windows, are masked off with polythene, for example, on the outside, or plus on the inside as well, to stop that rain being driven in through those areas, particularly through the windows and doors.
Do you inspect those areas as you get ready to put it full of cellulose?
What I tend to do is, particularly if it's been raining or not raining as the case, you generally find if it's been raining, you will tend to see staining, particularly on boards, for example, and you'll see rainwater accumulate and dribble through to the bottom of the void on a wall, for example, and then you may see a patch of water that may have gathered or tried to dry up over a day or two. So what I would do then is drill the wall. Because the hole that we drill, we can shine a torch inside, for example, and see if it's still damp. If I put my hand in it and it's still damp, then obviously they've got an issue that needs to be addressed to stop that water from getting in.
And over time, there's no risk of water getting in anyway. It's a timber structure, so does that not just break down or have the potential to?
It's a case of, ideally, once the frame of the building is sealed, then from wear and tear, there could be an issue later on where rainwater may penetrate in, but hopefully not. But if it does, and if it's of a small amount, then the insulation can take up a certain amount of moisture and it will release it then, because it will dry up and cope with a certain amount of moisture, but not too much like a bad leak going into the insulation would need then to be removed, because you'll have problems then with damage or staining to the inner boards, or for example.
And does that happen often? You're brought back to something that's, what do you have to do, clean out the void?
I have done it in the past, but that's only down to sort of management of the site, really, where we've told the builder or whatever that if they don't get the building watertight, you're going to have a problem. And we've insulated the property, for example, and days or weeks have gone on by, and nothing has been rectified, or they've been delayed for whatever reason, and then the weather has turned nasty. All this rain has continued to pile down on the building, and it's made its way through into the insulation to the point of it totally soaked the insulation, made it slump, and you can see the damage then to the boards, because the boards tend to warp, and all the timbers look all damp. And then when we then asked to come back to remove all this wet material, we have to do the opposite. We have to cut a large hole in the board if the board is not too badly damaged, or the old board is taken off, and then all that wet insulation then is totally removed before it can be replaced with dry, but only replaced with dry once the building is watertight.
But this is not something that happens that often.
No, it's few and far between. Over the 26 years, I can count on my hand possibly maybe three or four times I've been.
Wow.
So over 26 years, so that's not too bad. That's pretty good. But of those ones that failed, were down to problems that were managed by people that didn't understand that the building needs to be wind and watertight, and they had a problem.
How long will we expect this to last? Are we suddenly going to have lots of issues with this insulation, or will it just go on and on?
Generally, once the insulation's in, it's there for the lifetime of the building, and as long as the fabric and the structure of the building is sound, it'll be there forever and a day. It'll be fine.
Would you say this is getting more popular as an insulation choice, or how do you see this market?
It's growing to the point of there's more and more people looking to push for a greener product and get the benefits of using warm cell or another sort of cellulose product. I can see it sort of increasing very, very slowly, where people are looking to recycle as much as they possibly can, whether it be the insulation, whether it be the boards, with all sorts of things, and sourcing the material as local as possible.
When you look at other insulation types, do you see this as the most sustainable, or how do you think it fits into the market?
It fits it as for being sustainable. It's up there with the rest of them. Cellulose being right at the very top. You've got other insulation products that are near the mark, sheep's wool and all the rest of it, and then you can whittle your way back down to the man-made materials, and your fiberglass and your rock wool and your polyurethane foam and your Kingspan and your Celtex. There's all those types of insulation that's out there, which are always going to be out there. But cellulose is slowly creeping well back into the marketplace, and doing a great job.
So if someone is looking at this seriously, perhaps they know they're going timber frame, but want to consider cellulose as well, is there anything they need to do, or can this work with any timber frame?
Basically, if they want to go down the road of using cellulose, is firstly to try and get as much feedback from other people that have had properties sort of built. Speak to architects, speak to builders, speak to guys that do the installation. Ask as many questions as you possibly can to get on the right foot, to say, right, that's the product that I need, that's where I'm going to go down. Choose the right materials from the outside to the inside, and then everything will be fine.
And finally, any other tips for self-builders? I suppose it could be on something completely separate if you fancy it, or in regard to cellulose insulation.
Tips for self-builders. What I'd like to say is, if they want to keep it all self-building, if they can get to a point where they can actually install the insulation themselves.
Oh, really?
if they want to get involved. But if they don't want to...
Is that wise?
I've been on jobs where self-builders have helped to get involved, as long as, say, for example, if I'm there, I'm watching every move that they make and everything is set up right. But it's not a problem to just get hold of somebody like myself or another insulation company that puts cellulose, pumps it into walls and everywhere else, and they'd be quite happy to do the job for them.
Well, Gordon, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Cheers, thanks.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session, houseplanninghelp.com/195. We're creeping up on episode 200, aren't we? You can review the main information once again. We've made a summary for you. We've thrown in some photos so you can see what is this equipment. We've talked about it. What does it actually look like? How does he go around the building? So check out some photos there. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, you can scroll down to the bottom of the show notes. There's a place to do it there. We'll show you how to get hold of Gordon if you're thinking, I want to go down this route. houseplanninghelp.com/195. And if you're one of our hub members, then there's an episode of the Buckinghamshire Passive House case study. This is an in-depth video case study with various different parts. Well, there's one with Gordon coming up very soon. I think the one that we're on at the moment is the windows and doors going in, which is one of those last steps, and the styco boarding, just making sure it's all ready for him to arrive on site. But that will be coming for you very soon if you're one of our hub members. And if you're not, houseplanninghelp.com/join. Find out what it's all about. That's it as far as we go for today. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.